Hi, and now we're going to look at society, social structure, and social interaction part 2. Now with this particular here, the social stability and changes in society is going to be the focus point. So changes in social structure have a dramatic impact on individuals and groups. Both Emil Durkheim, he came up with both mechanical and organic solidarity, and Ferdinand Tönnies Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft are developed typologies to explain the process of stability and change in a social structure of societies. And we'll begin with Durkheim. Emil Durkheim has been a predominant figure in sociology and the development of it, and his primary concern with what holds societies together. Now, pre-industrial societies were held together by strong traditions and by the members' shared moral beliefs and values. Now, more industrialized societies they were held together by members' shared dependence on one another. Now, social solidarity stems from a society's social structure, which in turn is based on a society's division of labor. Division of labor refers to how the various tasks of a society are divided up and performed. Who gets assigned to what, not specifically as an individual, but as groups. People in diverse societies, or in the same society at different points in time, divide their tasks somewhat differently, based on their own history, physical environment, and levels of technological development. Now, to explain social change, Durkheim developed a typology that categorized societies as having either mechanical or organic solidarity. Now, we need to have a definition to clarify this. Mechanical solidarity is the social cohesion in pre-industrial societies in which there is minimal division of labor. People feel united by shared values and common social and social bonds. Now, Durkheim used the term mechanical solidarity because he believed that people in such pre-industrial societies feel a more or less automatic sense of belonging. Social interaction is characterized by face-to-face, intimate, primary group relationships. Now, everyone is engaged in similar work and little specialization is found in the division of labor, so it was very mechanical, in that process of working together to achieve similar goals was what would pull people together and create solidarity. Now, organic solidarity, this social cohesion in industrial societies, in which people perform very specialized tasks and feel united by a mutual dependence. Now, Durkheim chose the term organic solidarity because he believed that individuals in industrial societies come to rely on one another in much the same way that organs of the human body function interdependently. Your heart doesn't work independently of other parts of your body, for your brain, your muscles, your circulatory system. They are interdependent, means that they depend on each other, and the complete functional component of your whole body is that all the body parts work together. Social interaction is less personal in this instance, and it's more status-oriented and more focused on specific goals and objectives. Now, people no longer rely on morality or shared values for social solidarity. Instead, they are bound together by practical considerations. So that's Durkheim's sort of view of solidarity in sort of two periods of time in human development, if you will. When we look at Tony, in his terms, he included two terms which I mentioned briefly, which was Gemeinschaft. This is a traditional society in which social relationships are based on personal bonds of friendship and kinship on the intergenerality stability. That is to say, the more linking you have over time with your family and your kins, there's where that's the more traditional Gemeinschaft. Now, these relationships are based on ascribed rather than achieved status, so who you're born into, in which society's people have a commitment to the entire group and feel a sense of togetherness. Now, he used these German terms. Now, the Gemeinschaft, because it means commune or community. Social solidarity and social control are maintained by the community. Members have a strong sense of belonging, and they also have a limited amount of privacy. Now, Gesellschaft, this is a large urban society in which social bonds are based on more impersonal and specialized relationships like long-term commitment to a group or a consensus of values. Now, such societies as Gesellschaft, most people are strangers who perceive that they have little in common with most other people. Consequently, self-interest dominates. Little consensus exists regarding values. Now, Tony selected the German term Gesellschaft because it means association. Relationships are based on achieved status, and interactions among people are both rational and calculated. So, we've looked so far in this particular chapter at sort of large social entities. We're going to move into the micro perspective, and that's the micro perspective of social interaction. That's the face-to-face interaction that occurs between people on a day-to-day basis. So when we think about the micro social interaction, the process by which people act toward or respond to other people. This is the formation of meaningful relationships in society. Social interaction within a society is guided by shared meaning, expectations, and how we are to behave. While interaction rituals may be shared, the subjective meaning individuals assign to them are not. I mean, this really plays out a lot in a very diverse community where maybe, at any given time you could be sitting and dining with people of different cultures, and you may, even if you had no words, just the social interaction that you may have with food. Whether you use utensils, whether you use your fingers, whether you use your left hand or your right hand, whether you have a communal shared food where I can take my bread or roti and put it in and mix with other people. That's all of that social interaction, and how those subjective meanings, what food is and how we interact with it, is very subjective based on cultures. Now, the social construction of reality refers to the process by which our perception of reality is shaped by the subjective meaning that we give to the experience, meanings which are in turn influenced by race, ethnicity, gender, and social class. I was recently at a wedding of people from Morocco and Guyana, and just to see the differences in how the ceremonies go, and the dress, the costume, the tradition is different than what I was familiar with, and that's part of that sort of, the meaning that is gained from their experience is different from the meaning that I have gained from my experience, from my cultural background. And so that makes culture either very rich or it can become quite convoluted. Dominant group members with prestigious status may have the ability to establish how other people define reality. Now, the dominant groups perpetuate a dominant worldview that is frequently seen as social reality. Now, ethnomethodology, you probably haven't heard that term. This is the study of common sense knowledge that people use to understand situations in which they find themselves in. Ethnomethodology contributes to our understanding of the meaning by exposing subconscious social reality using breaching experiments to reveal background expectancies. And you'll see breaching experiments in your textbook. You might want to just sort of see what that means. Ethnomethodologists examine existing patterns of conventional behavior in order to uncover people's background expectancies, that is, their shared interpretation of objects and events, as well as their resulting actions. To uncover people's background expectancies, ethnomethodologists frequently break rules and act as though they don't understand some of the basic social life so that you can observe other people's responses. These are called breaching experiments. You could argue that my wearing shorts in the winter is a sort of breaching experiment. I'm breaking the rules of society. I'm wearing shorts in cold weather. What do people do? How do they respond to me? What do they say? To give some understanding about what their beliefs or their their basic rules of what success, what's successful social life. Well, I breach those rules. Thus the term breaching experiment. So now we're going to look at some of the sort of sociology of emotions and nonverbal behavior. Again, this is still in the very micro view. Now we're socialized to feel certain emotions, and we learn how and when to express or not to express emotions. We acquire a set of feeling rules which shape an appropriate emotion for a given role or specific situation. Feeling rules include how, where, when, and with whom an emotion should be expressed. For example, for the role of a mourner, someone who's lost somebody, and you're mourning, so there's a role for mourning, and at a funeral, feeling rules tells us which emotions are required. Sadness, grief, for example, are expected or required, which are acceptable. A sense of relief that the deceased is no longer has to suffer, which are also acceptable. Or you could have the more unacceptable, enjoyment of the occasion expressed by laughing out loud. Might not always be as well received. Now, sociology of emotions helps us understand that social context of our feelings and the relationship between roles we play and the emotions we experience. Excuse me. So we'll look at nonverbal communication and the what that is. The transfer of information between persons without the use of speech is basically a simple definition of nonverbal communication. Now it includes not only the visual cues, not only gestures, these are gestures, and not just appearance, how you're dressed, what you look like, your skin color, your hairstyle, but also vocal features. And this is the most, one of the more misunderstood elements of nonverbal communication is that your voice inflection is counted as nonverbal. The volume, whatever amount of volume, the pitch. These are all part of nonverbal. The environmental factors, how you use space, whether you stand close to people or need distance, whether you decorate your space in the way that you do represents nonverbal. Your position, where you are in relationship to other people, and do you sit straight up or do you slouch? These all affect nonverbal communication, and all of these affect meaning. If I'm trying to express how interested I am in you, and yet I'm slouched over and sort of drawing my attention like this while all the time going, am I really showing you how interested I am, or do you receive from my nonverbal communication that maybe I'm distracted and not as focused on you as I try to give you the communication that I am? So facial expressions, head movements, body position, and other gestures carry as much of the total meaning of our communication with others as our spoken words do. And in fact, it could be argued that this nonverbal carries more weight than our words. So what functions do nonverbal communication provide? Well, first, we obtain our first impressions of others from various kinds of nonverbal communication. The clothing people are wearing, their body positions provide first impressions. And these first impressions are made in the very first few seconds, and I mean that quite literally. Some of the research says that we make our first impressions within a second, and we don't give up our first impressions very easily. So that makes you wonder about how many first impressions of you may not be entirely accurate. Nonverbal communication provides information about emotional states. Head and facial movements may provide us with information about a person's emotional state, and others receive similar information from us. Through our body's posture, eye contact, we signal that we do not, or we do, wish to speak to someone. Now we have to bear in mind, again, this diversity of culture and how people have different social rules, that because my social rule from the culture I'm from maybe respects eye-to-eye contact through dialogue, other cultures don't view eye-to-eye contact as favorably. And so if I don't understand that dynamic and you're not giving me good eye contact because culturally that's not normative for you, I might misinterpret your eye moving away from my eyes as something negative when in fact it's not. For example, you may look down at the sidewalk or off into the distance when we pass homeless people who look at us as if they're going to ask us for money. Nonverbal communication establishes the relationship among people in terms of their responsiveness to and power over another. We show that we are responsive toward or like other persons by maintaining eye contact and attentive body posture, and perhaps by touching and standing close. Nonverbal communication is used to express power and control over others. A researcher by the name of Goffman in 1956 suggested that demeanor, how we behave or conduct ourselves, is relative to social power. Deference is the symbolic means by which subordinates give a required permissive response to power. It confirms that the existence of inequity and reaffirms each other's relationship to the other. So what that's meaning is, if I'm fully aware and cognizant of the role my boss plays in my work environment, that when my boss comes to me to tell me what they need me to do, deference is that symbolic representation that I know that they're my boss and I'm subordinate, and I might give a cast eyes down or start approving their position before they've even said anything, and that when they give me my task, I don't argue it. That's part of the symbolic deference. I defer to you and your authority. Now, facial expressions, eye contact, and touching are all important elements of nonverbal communication. These are nonverbal communication is symbolic of our relationship with others. The key issue is status of the person who is doing the smiling, staring, touching, relative to the status of the recipient. I may bring this up later, but I'm going to touch on it now. Just the simple touch of the person next to you on their shoulder nearest to you is quite a bit different than crossing their neck, their spine, and touching the other shoulder. That communicates something completely different, especially if you're a man and the person beside you is a woman. So when we think in terms of touch, it's very subtle and yet can be very specific and very powerful. Facial expressions, especially smiles, also reflect gender-based patterns of dominance and subordination in our society. Women typically have been socialized to smile and frequently do so even when they're not happy. Men tend to display less emotion through smiles or other facial expressions and instead seek to show that they are reserved and in control. Women and men use eye contact differently during conversations. Women are more likely to sustain eye contact during conversations, but not otherwise, and as a way of showing their interest in and involvement with others. Men, on the other hand, are less likely to maintain prolonged eye contact during conversations, but are more likely to stare at one another or stare at other people, especially other men, to challenge them and assert their own status. Now, we may find some of these subtleties that are expressed in your textbook slightly foreign to yourselves. It's because that in society, the meanings of different elements, that could be the meanings of what it is to be masculine, what it is to be feminine, or what it is to be subordinate, or what it is for anything, change over time, sometimes more slowly than other times, and that's the changing of the social meaning of things. So some of these may sound somewhat unlikely for you, but they haven't been unlikely in our society at some point, and that in fact there could be some changes occurring. Gender and power differences are evident in tactile communication from birth. Women may hug and touch others to indicate affection and emotional support, while men are more likely to touch others to give directions, assert power, and express sexual interest. Personal space is the immediate area surrounding a person that the person claims as private. When others invade our space, we may retreat, stand our ground, or become angry. And you've probably had that experience where someone gets closer to you than you want them to be, whether that's because you don't know them very well, or that this isn't very comfortable, or they just have breached your personal space. Personal space is contained within the invisible boundaries surrounding your body, much like a snail's shell. Power differentials are reflected in personal space and privacy issues. Age, gender, the kind of relationship, social class, ethnicity, religion help define personal space. Now, learning to understand and respect alternative styles of social interaction enhances our personal effectiveness by increasing the range of options we have for communicating with other people in different, diverse contexts or for varied reasons. And so getting a handle on this diversity of social meaning and social interaction helps us become better communicators. Now, while it's difficult to generalize about people's nonverbal behavior, we still need to think about our own nonverbal communication patterns. Recognizing that differences in social interaction exist is important. We should be very wary of making value judgments. The differences are simply differences. As we move forward, macro level and micro level analysis are essential to the determination of how our social structure should be shaped so that they can respond and deal with major problems such as homelessness, poverty, and addiction. All right, this has been a quick overview on this part 2. I hope it's been helpful. Good luck and carry on the good work, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye now.